It was early in the morning when the sound hit me first. A low, steady rumble that seemed to roll across the fields like distant thunder. At first, I thought maybe it was a storm coming in, the kind that creeps up quietly before unleashing itself. But then the noise grew louder, sharper, almost mechanical. I walked to the porch, coffee mug in hand, still half asleep, and that's when I saw them. Not one. Not two. But a whole line of massive yellow bulldozers, crawling down the dirt road toward my farm like an army ready for war. 10 of them, side by side, engines growling, metal teeth glinting in the pale morning light. I just stood there stunned. This wasn't a construction crew I had hired. And it certainly wasn't a friendly visit. My driveway, the one I had driven up and down for years without thinking twice, was about to be swallowed by roaring machines. The dust kicked up behind them turned the sunrise into a murky haze, and all I could think was, what in the world is going on? They didn't slow down when they got closer. The first one swung left toward my fence line, the second angled right toward the front gate, and the rest started forming a barricade across my property's entrance. The ground shook under their weight, and the metallic clang of their blades dropping into place echoed across the fields. My once quiet morning had turned into a full-blown siege. I grabbed my phone, thinking there had to be some mistake, some wrong address, some reason this parade of steel had decided to park itself at my doorstep. But before I could even call anyone, I saw her. Standing just beyond the lead bulldozer, arms crossed, a smug little smile pulling at her lips. Karen. The self-proclaimed queen of the local HOA. She wasn't from around here, at least not originally. She had moved into the fancy new development just up the road about a year ago and, ever since, seemed to think she owned the entire countryside. She was wearing her usual spotless blazer, even though it was barely sunrise, and had a clipboard tucked under her arm like she was about to hand me a fine for breathing too loudly. I didn't even need to hear her voice to know she was behind this. Karen loved rules, and she loved making sure everyone knew it. I took a step toward her, still trying to wrap my head around what I was seeing. She tilted her head like she was inspecting a trespasser on her royal land, then called out something I couldn't quite hear over the growl of the engines. One of the bulldozer operators cut his machine, and the sudden quiet made her words land sharp and clear. "You're officially in violation of HOA property guidelines," she announced, like she was delivering a court sentence. "This land falls under our community's development plan. You can't just run a farm here without approval." I almost laughed. Almost. Except there was nothing funny about 10 bulldozers sitting at my front gate. "This is my land," I said, voice steady but boiling underneath. "It's been my land long before that neighborhood of yours even existed." She gave a little shrug, the kind that says I don't care what you think. "You've been sent multiple notices," she continued, tapping her clipboard. "Since you refused to comply, we're taking necessary action. You can join the HOA and follow the rules, or we'll make it impossible for you to access this property until you do." I looked past her at the wall of steel blocking my driveway, and a wave of disbelief hit me. She wasn't bluffing. She had actually brought in heavy machinery to trap me on my own farm. The arrogance was almost impressive. A couple of the operators exchanged uneasy glances, like even they weren't sure this was legal. But Karen didn't flinch. She stood there as if she owned the sunrise, the soil, and the air I was breathing. And in that moment, I realized something she clearly hadn't. She thought she was dealing with just another stubborn landowner she could push around. She had no idea who I really was, no clue about the position I held or the authority I carried. And as I stood there, staring at the ridiculous blockade she'd brought to my doorstep, I couldn't help but think, this was going to get very interesting. Karen didn't move from her spot. She just kept staring at me like she was sizing up a stubborn child. The engines of the bulldozers rumbled low, ready to spring into motion at her signal. Dust drifted in the air, catching the golden edge of the morning sun, and for a split second, it felt like the start of some old Western standoff. Only this time, instead of horses, there were 10 massive machines waiting for orders. I walked toward the barricade, slow and deliberate. My boots crunched against the gravel, each step cutting through the thick tension. A couple of the operators shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. One of them leaned down and said something to the guy next to him, but I couldn't hear over the low growl of the engines. The smell of diesel was strong enough to burn my nose. Karen glanced at her clipboard, flipping through a couple of pages like she had all the proof she needed. "You're in violation of Section 14, subsection C," she said, raising her voice as I got closer. "Unauthorized agricultural activity in a planned community zone." I raised an eyebrow. "Planned community zone? This is farmland. It's been farmland for generations. My grandfather built that barn before you were even born." She smirked, tapping her pen against the board. And now it's part of a community. Which means new rules. You should have thought about that before you decided to ignore every notice we sent. I stopped just a few feet away from her. Every notice you sent went straight into the trash. Because they mean nothing. This isn't your jurisdiction. That got her attention. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing just enough to show a flicker of uncertainty. But she covered it quickly with that same condescending smile. We'll see about that. These bulldozers aren't here for decoration. We're going to start clearing out these violations today. You can either move your equipment and livestock or, she gestured toward the machines, we'll do it for you. The audacity was unreal. She was actually threatening to tear apart my property without a shred of real authority. The operators were clearly unsure, but they kept their hands on the controls, waiting for her to give the go-ahead. I took a slow breath. You have no idea what you're doing, Karen? No idea at all. She laughed, short and sharp. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm making sure the HOA's vision for this community is protected. We don't need barns and tractors ruining property values. People pay good money to live here. That's when I noticed a couple of her loyal HOA board members standing off to the side. They weren't saying anything, probably didn't want to get caught in the crossfire, but they were there for moral support. Clipboards in hand, sunglasses on, pretending to be official. I looked back at the barricade, at the steel wall she had lined up against me. My truck was parked just behind my gate, now completely blocked in. My tractor was in the barn, useless as long as those machines were sitting out front. She had thought this through, at least from her perspective. The problem for her was she had no clue who she was trying to mess with. No clue that the land she was threatening to protect for her little community was under my authority in more ways than she could imagine. Still, I played along for the moment. So you're telling me, I said slowly, that you and your little clipboard army think you can just take over this land because you feel like it? It's not about feelings, she replied, chin high. It's about regulations. And like I said, you're out of compliance. I stepped even closer, enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet my eyes. Karen, if you start those bulldozers, you're making the biggest mistake of your life. She didn't flinch. She just turned to the lead operator and gave a small nod. The man hesitated, his hand hovering over the controls. His eyes darted between her and me, and I could see the doubt written all over his face. The first bulldozer engine revved higher, the deep roar echoing off the trees. My heart pounded, not from fear but from the surge of control I knew I still had in this situation. I let the sound fill the space for a few long seconds, then leaned in just enough for her to hear me over the noise. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Her smirk faltered for the briefest moment, just enough for me to see that she was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had made a very big mistake. The bulldozers sat there, engines rumbling like restless beasts waiting for a signal. Karen's smug expression told me she thought she had already won. She didn't realize that this was the calm before a very different kind of storm. I took a deep breath and let my eyes travel slowly from one machine to the next, locking eyes with the operators one by one. Most of them looked away. They weren't HOA members. They were just guys hired to do a job. And deep down, I could tell they were starting to question whether they were in the right place at the right time. I walked right up to the lead bulldozer and rested my hand on the cold steel blade. The operator shifted uncomfortably, glancing over at Karen for reassurance. She gave him a sharp nod, but I could see the uncertainty brewing behind her sunglasses. She wasn't used to anyone standing their ground against her, especially not in front of an audience. You know, I said, my voice calm but firm, before you drop that blade and tear into my land, you might want to think about what happens next. Because once you start, you can't undo it. The operator swallowed hard. He knew I was right. Heavy machinery doesn't just make a dent, it makes a statement. And if that statement turns out to be illegal, the one sitting in the driver's seat pays a heavy price. Karen scoffed. Don't listen to him. He's bluffing. He's been ignoring our notices for months. Now he wants to scare you so he can keep breaking the rules. I turned slowly to face her. Breaking the rules? You think you're the law out here? Let me explain something, Karen. The HOA doesn't run this land. You don't get to decide who farms and who doesn't. And you sure as hell don't have the authority to send in bulldozers without a court order. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't like being challenged, especially in public. But she wasn't backing down. We have a development plan, she snapped. This land is part of it. The board approved it. I stepped closer, close enough that she could see the calm in my eyes wasn't from fear. It was from knowing exactly how much power I had in this situation. The board approved it? That's cute. But there's a bigger board, Karen. And I sit on it. You're playing checkers on a chessboard and you don't even know the rules. Her eyebrows twitched just barely, but it was the first crack in her armor. What are you talking about? She demanded. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket and made a quick call. Yeah, it's me, I said into the receiver. I've got 10 bulldozers blocking my private property without authorization. I'm going to need a crew down here to shut this down immediately. And send the county inspector while you're at it. I paused, glancing directly at Karen. Oh, and make sure they know it's coming from the land commissioner's office. Her head jerked back like she'd been slapped. For a moment she just stood there, blinking as if she couldn't process what she'd just heard. The land commissioner? She repeated slowly as if the words tasted wrong in her mouth. That's right, I said, sliding the phone back into my pocket. The very same office that oversees land use, property boundaries, and development permits for this entire county. Which means, I gestured to the line of bulldozers, you've just staged an illegal blockade on land you have zero authority over. A murmur rippled through the bulldozer operators. One of them actually killed his engine and stepped down from the cab. Hey, no one told me this was county land, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I'm not getting involved in that mess. Karen tried to recover. Don't let him scare you. He's just throwing around big titles too. I cut her off. Karen, I'm not throwing around anything. I'm telling you exactly who you picked a fight with. You've spent weeks sending me your little letters, threatening me with your made-up rules. And now you've brought heavy machinery onto land that's not yours. Do you have any idea how many laws you just broke? Her face flushed red, but she tried to keep her chin high. We were acting in the best interest of the community, she said stiffly. That's going to sound real convincing when you're explaining it to the sheriff, I replied, pulling my phone out again. Oh, and I'm sure the county zoning board will love to hear about this too. Especially since I sit at the head of it. Another operator shut off his engine. Then another. The roar of machinery began to fade one by one until only a couple were still running. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Karen glanced around, realizing that her once loyal blockade was starting to crumble. I took one slow step toward her. You came here today thinking you could push me into your little HOA box. But you made one big mistake. You forgot to check who owns the game board. She swallowed hard, and for the first time all morning she didn't have a quick comeback. She just stood there, frozen between the dying hum of the bulldozers and the weight of a reality she hadn't seen coming. Karen's confidence was slipping fast, though she tried to hide it behind a tight smile. The sound of bulldozer engines cutting off one by one was like a countdown clock ticking in my favor. The men she'd hired were starting to realize they might be part of something way bigger, and a whole lot riskier, than a simple land clearing job. One of them muttered under his breath, "This ain't worth the paycheck," before stepping down from his cab and walking toward the road. Karen's head whipped around. "Where are you going?" she barked. He didn't even look back. Away from trouble. I didn't sign up to fight with the county. That one statement was all it took for the rest of the crew to start exchanging nervous glances. Another man shut off his machine, hopped down, and joined the first. The ripple effect was in motion. I stayed quiet, letting her watch her power crumble in real time. Her eyes darted from one bulldozer to the next, her jaw tightening with every engine that went silent. This wasn't going the way she'd planned, and she knew it. Finally, she turned back to me, her voice a little sharper than before. "You think this changes anything? You might scare off these guys, but the HOA still has authority over what happens here." I stepped closer, my boots crunching on the gravel, until I was standing just a few feet away from her. "No, Karen. The HOA has authority over your neighborhood, your paved streets, your mailboxes, your lawn gnomes. But this," I swept my arm toward the open fields, the barn, the orchard, "is not your kingdom. And you're trespassing." The word landed like a hammer. Trespassing. It had a certain weight to it, especially when spoken by someone who could actually back it up with a badge and a title. Karen crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "We sent notices. You ignored them. We acted within our rights." I gave a slow, deliberate shake of my head. "You acted outside your rights. Way outside. And if you think those pieces of paper you stuffed in my mailbox give you permission to send heavy machinery onto county land, you're about to learn how wrong you are." One of the remaining operators, a tall guy with grease-stained gloves, leaned over the side of his bulldozer. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "I'm shutting this down. If he's the land commissioner, we could get fined or worse. This isn't worth jail time." Without waiting for her response, he killed the engine. The last two followed suit almost immediately. The once deafening blockade was now a silent line of useless steel. Karen spun on them. "You're all quitting? Just like that?" The tall guy shrugged. "Lady, you didn't tell us the full story. That's on you." Her face flushed crimson. She turned back to me, her voice shaking now, not with fear but with barely contained frustration. "You can't just wave your title around like some magic shield. We'll take this to court if we have to." I smiled faintly. "Good. I'll see you there. I'm sure the judge will be very interested to hear how the HOA hired 10 bulldozers to illegally block county farmland. And while we're there, we can talk about the criminal trespassing charges, the unlawful interference with agricultural operations, and, oh, let's not forget, the damage you've already caused to my property line." Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. In the distance, I could hear the faint wail of a siren. Not the urgent blare of an ambulance, but the steady, deliberate call of a sheriff's cruiser making its way down the dirt road. Karen glanced toward the sound, and for the first time, I saw the flicker of real panic cross her face. The deputies would be here in less than a minute. And when they pulled up, they weren't going to care about her HOA meeting notes or her stack of printed regulations. They were going to care about the fact that she had mobilized heavy equipment to block a sitting land commissioner from his own land. Karen's composure cracked just a little more. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, glancing toward her SUV parked at the side of the road. Her board members, the ones who had been standing so confidently behind her earlier, were now looking anywhere but at her. One of them started scrolling on their phone like they suddenly had urgent business elsewhere. I didn't move. I just stood there, letting the siren grow louder, letting the moment hang heavy in the air. She was cornered, but still too stubborn to admit defeat. That was the thing about people like Karen. They'd rather go down swinging than admit they'd been wrong from the start. The first glint of sunlight caught the chrome bumper of the approaching sheriff's truck. The sound of gravel crunching under its tires was like a drumbeat of inevitability. I didn't have to say anything else. She knew exactly what was about to happen. Her little siege was over. She just didn't want to admit it yet. The sheriff's truck rolled to a slow stop at the edge of the property, dust swirling around its tires. The siren cut out, but the faint hum of the engine stayed steady and unhurried. The door opened, and out stepped Sheriff Daniels, broad shoulders, mirrored sunglasses, and the kind of presence that made people think twice before speaking out of turn. He took one slow look around, the line of idle bulldozers, the operators standing awkwardly to the side, Karen with her clipboard clutched tight, and me standing in front of my gate. He didn't rush. Daniels never rushed. He walked toward us, boots sinking into the gravel with every step, and stopped just far enough away that we both had to look at him. "All right," he said in a calm, measured voice. "Someone want to explain why I've got 10 bulldozers parked on county land at 7:30 in the morning?" Karen was the first to speak. "Sheriff, thank goodness you're here. This man," she jabbed a finger in my direction, "is in violation of our HOA's community regulations. We've sent him multiple notices, but he refuses to comply. We had no choice but to enforce our rules and secure the property until this could be sorted out." Daniels tilted his head slightly, like he'd just heard something mildly amusing. "Enforce your rules? By blocking access to private land with heavy machinery?" Karen straightened her back. "Yes. It's well within our rights as an HOA." Daniels turned his gaze to me, one eyebrow raised above his sunglasses. "That true? I didn't even have to think. No, Sheriff. This is my farm. My family's had it for decades. It's not in the HOA's jurisdiction. I'm also the land commissioner for this county, which means," I gestured toward the barricade, "these machines are sitting on land they have no authority over." Daniel's expression didn't change much, but I saw the faintest twitch of his jaw. He turned back to Karen. "You're aware this is county jurisdiction, right?" Her eyes flickered. "It's adjacent to our development. That makes it part of the planned community expansion zone." The sheriff let out a short, quiet chuckle, more disbelief than humor. "That's not how this works. Expansion zones don't just swallow up someone's land because you wish it so. And even if you had a claim, which you don't, sending in bulldozers without a court order? That's trespassing, Karen. On a very big scale." She opened her mouth to argue, but Daniels held up a hand. "Not done yet." He turned toward the bulldozer operators, his tone shifting just enough to carry a warning. "Any of you know you were brought here for something that wasn't authorized?" One by one they shook their heads. The tall guy from earlier spoke up. "She told us it was HOA property. Said we were clearing violations. We had no idea it was county land." Daniels nodded once. "All right. Here's the deal. You're gonna take those machines and get them off this property. No. If I find out you damage even a single fence post on the way out, we're going to have a whole different kind of conversation." The men didn't waste a second. Engines coughed back to life, the roar breaking the heavy silence, and one by one the bulldozers began pulling back from the gate. Gravel crunched, diesel smoke curled upward, and the so-called blockade dissolved right in front of us. Karen's jaw tightened. She stepped toward Daniels, lowering her voice but not enough that I couldn't hear. "Sheriff, you don't understand. If we don't act, this property could destroy the value of the entire neighborhood. There are rules for a reason." Daniels sighed. "Karen, I'm going to say this once. Your rules stop where county land begins. And right now you're standing on someone else's property with a whole bunch of hired equipment you shouldn't have. That's not enforcing rules. That's asking for legal trouble." Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "We were just trying to do what's best for the community." He gave her a long, steady look. "Maybe you ought to start with understanding where your community ends." I stayed quiet, watching her grip her clipboard like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her board members were already retreating toward their cars, suddenly in a big hurry to be anywhere but here. The bulldozers were almost all gone now, the morning sunlight spilling freely across the drive again. Daniels glanced back at me. "You want me to file a trespassing report?" I gave a small nod. "Absolutely. And we'll be adding unlawful interference with agricultural operations to that list." He scribbled something in his notepad, then looked at Karen one last time. "I'd suggest you head home, ma'am, before this turns into something more serious." For the first time all morning she didn't have a single word to fire back. She just stood there, lips pressed tight, watching her grand plan unravel piece by piece. The sheriff's truck idled quietly nearby, a silent reminder that this wasn't over, but it was very much out of her control now. The sound of the last bulldozer rolling away was like the final nail in the coffin of her little operation. The air felt lighter, but the look on her face told me she still hadn't given up. People like Karen never walk away willingly. They just wait for the next move. The dust from the retreating bulldozers still hung in the morning air, swirling lazily in the sunlight. Karen stood there like a statue, her heels planted in the gravel, clutching that clipboard so hard I half expected it to snap in two. The sheriff was still by his truck, scribbling notes, and I could see from the corner of my eye that her board members had quietly slipped away, leaving her to stand alone in the mess she'd created. I pulled my phone out again, scrolling to a contact I knew would answer on the first ring. "Yeah, it's me," I said when the familiar voice came through. "We're moving forward with the complaint. Trespassing, illegal use of heavy equipment, interference with agricultural operations. The works. I want it on record before noon." I didn't lower my voice either. Karen's head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing as she realized I wasn't bluffing. "You can't do that," she said, trying to sound firm but not quite pulling it off. I turned to face her. "Karen, I can do a lot more than that. And I will. You crossed a line today that you can't just smooth over with some HOA letterhead." She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't give her the chance. "You thought you could drag me into your little neighborhood power games. What you didn't think about is that this isn't just a personal dispute anymore. This is a county-level offense. And lucky for me, I don't have to fight this alone. I have the law, the land, and the authority all on my side." Her grip on the clipboard loosened just a fraction. "We were acting for the good of the community," she muttered, like repeating it would somehow make it true. "For the good of your community," I corrected. "Not mine. And here's the thing, you don't get to rewrite property boundaries just because you don't like what's on the other side of them." The sheriff looked up from his notes, catching my eye. "I'll make sure the report is filed by end of day," he said. "You'll get your copy for the record." "Appreciate it," I told him, then slipped my phone back into my pocket. But I wasn't done yet. I stepped closer to Karen, keeping my voice low so only she could hear. "This isn't going to end with a report. I'm calling for a formal review of your HOA's activities. Every permit. Every enforcement action. Every letter you've sent. And I'll make sure the county attorney sees exactly how you've been operating. If you've been overstepping here, chances are this isn't the first time. And if that's the case, your little reign is going to crumble a lot faster than you think." Her eyes darted toward the sheriff as if hoping he might step in on her behalf. He didn't. He just went back to writing like he'd already seen enough. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "No," I said calmly, "you made the mistake. I'm just cleaning it up." Behind us, the last bulldozer rumbled away down the dirt road, the sound fading into the distance until all that was left was the quiet hum of the morning. The silence was almost jarring after the chaos from earlier, but it gave my words more weight. Karen shifted on her feet, her confidence wearing thinner by the second. "We could work something out," she said finally, her voice dropping a little. I tilted my head. "Like what?" "You stay on your side of the line and I forget you tried to bulldoze my farm?" Her lips pressed into a thin line again. She didn't answer. "That's what I thought," I said, stepping back. "Here's my advice. Take whatever energy you've been using to micromanage your neighbor's flower beds and use it to learn where your HOA's boundaries actually are. Because the next time you cross onto my land without permission, I won't be calling the sheriff first. I'll be calling my attorney." The sheriff tore the top sheet from his notepad and handed it to me. "Copy for your records," he said. I glanced over it, then slipped it into my jacket. "Thanks. That'll do for now." Karen looked like she wanted to say something else, but the words stayed trapped behind clenched teeth. She finally turned toward her SUV, her heels crunching in the gravel, each step sounding like a reluctant retreat. The engine started with a sharp growl, and she backed out onto the road without looking at me. I watched her taillights disappear down the lane. I knew she wasn't gone for good. People like Karen never truly backed down. But now the tables had turned. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was going on offense. And she had no idea just how far I was willing to take this. The sheriff shut his notepad and gave me a nod before heading back to his truck. The gravel crunched under his tires as he pulled away, leaving me alone in the quiet. The morning sun was higher now, spilling golden light over the fields, as if the land itself was reminding me who it belonged to. And the answer was simple: it sure as hell wasn't her. The quiet after the chaos felt strange. My driveway was clear again, the hum of the bulldozers nothing more than a memory, but the air still carried the weight of what had just happened. I walked back toward the porch, every step echoing with the thought that this wasn't over, it was only shifting gears. People like Karen didn't just vanish after a loss. They regrouped, they schemed, they tried again. But this time, I wasn't going to sit around waiting for her next move. Inside the house, I set my coffee mug down and pulled out my notepad. If she wanted a fight, I was going to bring her one, but on my terms. I started by writing down everything that had happened that morning: times, details, names, the exact sequence of events. Every rev of a bulldozer engine, every word she spat at me, every operator who admitted she hadn't told them the truth. I wanted it all on record. Then I picked up the phone. My first call went to the county zoning office. "I need to initiate a compliance review," I told the clerk. "Pull every permit, every enforcement action, every development request from this HOA for the last 5 years. If they've bent a rule, I want to know about it." The clerk hesitated for a second before saying, "Understood, Commissioner. We'll get that together for you right away." My second call went to the Agricultural Department. "Document today's incident under unlawful interference with agricultural operations," I said. "And flag this HOA for future review. I want them on our radar permanently." With each call, the picture in my mind got clearer. I wasn't just defending my farm anymore, I was drawing a line in stone. If they crossed it again, they wouldn't just face me, they'd face the full weight of county authority. I sat back for a moment, letting the sunlight filter through the window. This land had been in my family for generations. My grandfather had worked these fields by hand before tractors even touched the soil. Every fence post, every barn beam, every stretch of pasture meant something. And I wasn't about to let some HOA president with a power complex turn it into another manicured playground for city transplants. I reached for the file cabinet in the corner of my office and pulled out a thick folder, my personal copy of the county's land use regulations. Flipping through the pages, I found exactly what I was looking for: the section on jurisdiction boundaries. Clear as day, my property was outside any HOA authority. It wasn't just a gray area, it was written in black and white. That gave me an idea. I called the local paper. Not the big city one, but the smaller publication that everyone in the county actually read. "I've got a story for you," I said. "HOA president brings in bulldozers to block county farmland. Turns out the owner is the land commissioner. You interested?" The reporter's laugh was all the answer I needed. "Oh, we're more than interested. Can we send someone out today for photos?" "Absolutely," I said, glancing toward the dusty tracks still visible where the bulldozers had been parked. The scene still fresh. It wasn't just about public humiliation, though I knew that would sting Karen worse than any fine. This was about shining a light on how far the HOA had been willing to go. And when you shine light on people like that, they tend to scurry back into the shadows. By mid-afternoon, I had spoken to the county attorney as well. I didn't have to explain much. "She trespassed with heavy machinery," I said simply. We're pressing charges. We'll start drafting the paperwork, he replied without hesitation. I hung up, feeling the pieces fall into place. Karen had come to my property this morning thinking she could corner me. Now she was the one trapped in a maze she didn't even know existed. Every call I made was another wall closing in around her, and she didn't have the map to get out. I stepped outside onto the porch again, letting my eyes sweep over the fields. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the pasture. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint clink of a windmill turning in the breeze. This was my land. My responsibility. My fight. And for the first time all day I felt completely calm. Because I knew that whatever Karen tried next, I'd already be 10 steps ahead. And when the time came, she'd find out exactly what happens when you try to bulldoze the wrong man's farm. The first ripple hit faster than I expected. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing before sunrise. It was the county zoning clerk. "Commissioner, you might want to see this," she said, her voice carrying that mix of surprise and satisfaction. "We've pulled the HOA's records like you asked. There's a lot, and I mean a lot, of questionable activity here. Multiple enforcement actions with no supporting permits. Unauthorized fines. Even a couple of zoning violations they've tried to bury." I told her to email everything directly to my office. The moment I opened the file, I knew Karen was in trouble. This wasn't just one bad decision with bulldozers. This was a pattern. A long, ugly paper trail of overreach and intimidation. And the best part? Every bit of it was now in my hands. While I was scrolling through the files, my email pinged again. This time it was from the local paper. The headline was already live on their website. HOA bulldozer standoff with County Land Commissioner sparks legal firestorm. Below it was a wide photo of the bulldozers lined up at my gate, Karen standing in front with her clipboard, and me just a few steps away, arms folded. The article pulled no punches. It laid out the entire morning blow by blow, complete with quotes from the bulldozer operators who admitted they'd been misled. By the time I finished reading, the comments section was already on fire. Some locals were furious, calling the HOA a disgrace. Others shared their own horror stories about Karen and her board. People who'd been too intimidated to speak up before were now posting openly, emboldened by the fact that someone had finally stood up to her. And then came the calls. First, a councilman from the neighboring district. "I've had my eye on that HOA for years," he told me. "You've just opened the door for a full-scale audit. Count me in." Then a farmer from 2 towns over. "She's not the only one. A lot of these HOAs think they can muscle out people who've been here their whole lives. You keep pushing, you've got my support." Even the sheriff rang me later that afternoon. "Commissioner," he said, "I got word Karen tried to file a harassment complaint against you this morning. Don't worry, I shut it down before it went anywhere. But she's starting to realize she's in over her head." That was exactly what I wanted to hear. By late afternoon, the pressure was starting to show. A source in the zoning office told me Karen had been seen storming out of a meeting at the HOA clubhouse, her board members trailing behind like scolded schoolchildren. One of them, apparently, had suggested stepping down before things got worse. She'd snapped at him in front of everyone, saying it was all political theater, and she wasn't going anywhere. But deep down she had to know, this was no longer about neighborhood rules. This was about the law closing in. I decided to speed things along. I sent a formal letter to the HOA, outlining every potential charge they were facing: criminal trespassing, unauthorized use of heavy equipment, unlawful interference with agriculture, and abuse of authority. I copied the county attorney, the zoning board, and, just for good measure, the local press. It wasn't a threat. It was a roadmap of exactly where this was headed if they didn't back off. An hour later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was one of Karen's own board members. He spoke in a low, hurried voice. "Look, I'm not supposed to be talking to you, but some of us think she's lost it. We didn't sign up for this. If you need statements about what happened, we'll give them." That was the crack in the wall I'd been waiting for. I thanked him, kept the conversation short, and hung up. Then I leaned back in my chair, letting it sink in. The dominoes were starting to fall, not because I pushed them all at once, but because I'd set them up so that one by one they'd tip into each other. By sunset, the story had already spread beyond our county. A regional news outlet picked it up, running it under the headline, "County Land Commissioner Confronts HOA Over Bulldozer Standoff." Karen's name was front and center now. The public knew. The officials knew. And soon the investigators would know every last detail. As the sky turned gold over the fields, I stepped out onto the porch and watched the light settle over the land. The same land my grandfather had worked, the same land Karen had tried to blockade like it was hers to take. Now the tide was turning, and every move I made was tightening the circle around her. She'd started this as a show of force. She thought she could trap me. But now she was the one standing in the middle of a shrinking ring, and every exit was closing fast. The HOA clubhouse was buzzing like a hornet's nest that had just been kicked. Word of the bulldozer fiasco had spread faster than wildfire, and by the time their weekly meeting rolled around, it wasn't just the board members in attendance, half the neighborhood had shown up. Some were there to defend Karen. Most were there to see her squirm. I had a reliable source planted in that room, a neighbor who'd grown tired of Karen's antics long ago. She texted me updates as the evening unfolded. First message, *, she looks nervous. Keeps shuffling papers, *. Second, *, people are asking about the bulldozers. She's blaming you, says you provoked her, *. I almost laughed at that one. But the third message was the one I'd been waiting for. One guy just stood up and asked why she risked HOA funds on something that had nothing to do with our community. That was the crack widening. The thing about power is, it's a lot like glass. Once you see a fracture, it's only a matter of time before the whole thing shatters. According to my source, the room erupted. People began talking over one another, demanding answers. Someone shouted about the article in the local paper. Another demanded to know if Karen had even checked the county records before sending in heavy machinery. Karen tried to hold her ground, slamming her gavel and calling for order. But every time she raised her voice, someone raised theirs louder. It was no longer her meeting, it was an interrogation. I imagined her there, red-faced, sweat beading along her hairline, eyes darting from one angry neighbor to the next. That smug confidence she'd worn like armor was gone now, replaced by the realization that the walls were closing in. Midway through the chaos, my phone buzzed again. *, you're gonna love this. 2 board members just resigned. Said they won't be part of this mess. *. I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. 2 resignations in one night. That wasn't just a crack. That was a hole in the hull of her ship. But it didn't stop there. By the end of the meeting, several residents had started openly talking about a recall vote to remove her as HOA president. One even volunteered to start the petition that very night. Karen's attempts to steer the conversation back to community improvements fell flat. No one wanted to talk about landscaping budgets or streetlight repairs when the president had just made the neighborhood a laughingstock across the county. Meanwhile, my plan to keep the pressure on was working perfectly. Earlier that afternoon, I'd sent another letter. This one not just to the HOA, but to every homeowner in the development. In it, I laid out the facts: the lack of jurisdiction, the illegal blockade, the pending county investigation. I didn't embellish a single detail. I didn't have to. The truth was damning enough. By morning, that letter was being passed around on driveways and kitchen tables, photocopied and shared like contraband. People who'd once been intimidated by Karen's authority were suddenly realizing she wasn't untouchable after all. And when fear cracks, resentment rushes in to fill the space. By the end of the week, the clubhouse parking lot looked like a protest site. Small groups of neighbors gathered in the evenings, swapping stories about HOA overreach, some even pulling out old letters Karen had sent to threaten fines over mailbox colors and lawn ornaments. The air was thick with the kind of solidarity that comes when people realize they've all been on the receiving end of the same heavy hand. I didn't have to say much publicly. The situation was speaking for itself. Every day her authority eroded a little more. Every day more people sided with the truth. Behind the scenes, the county review of the HOA's records was moving forward. I'd already been told to expect findings within a week. And from what I'd seen in those early files, there was enough there to make the bulldozer stunt look like a traffic ticket in comparison. Karen must have known it too because her tone shifted. My source at the clubhouse told me she'd started hinting that maybe she'd been misinformed about the property lines. It wasn't an apology, it was a lifeline, a tiny thread she was hoping might pull her back from the edge. But it was too late for that. The residents had tasted blood in the water. And once that happens, the current doesn't stop. I could feel the shift from my porch even without stepping foot into one of their meetings. The same people who once gave her the benefit of the doubt were now looking at her like a liability. Her power wasn't slipping quietly, it was being ripped away piece by piece in broad daylight. And I knew exactly how to make sure she never got it back. The recall petition spread like wildfire. Within 48 hours, nearly every mailbox in the HOA had a copy tucked inside, and homeowners were signing without hesitation. The 2 board members who'd resigned earlier were now leading the charge, knocking on doors and collecting names. By the 3rd day, they had more than enough signatures to force a special vote. Karen must have felt the ground shifting under her because she tried to get ahead of it. She sent out a long, carefully worded email to every resident, calling the recall a politically motivated smear campaign and blaming outside forces for stirring up trouble. But the problem for her was simple. People had already made up their minds. I got word from my source that she'd called an emergency meeting of the remaining board members. The agenda was supposed to be about restoring public trust, but according to my source, it quickly turned into Karen snapping at anyone who questioned her judgment. The few allies she had left sat stiff and silent, clearly aware they were backing a sinking ship. Meanwhile, the legal side of things was tightening just as quickly. The county zoning audit was nearly complete, and the preliminary findings were worse than I'd even hoped. There were at least 6 separate violations where the HOA had acted without proper permits, 2 of which involved fines collected from homeowners that had no legal basis whatsoever. And then there were the overreach incidents, threatening letters, unauthorized property inspections, and even one case where they tried to order a shed torn down on land they didn't control. The bulldozer stunt, bad as it was starting to look like just the tip of a very ugly iceberg. I sat in my office one evening going through the audit notes when my phone buzzed with a new message from the county attorney. * drafting official notice of violations. Expect to serve by end of week. *. That was the hammer I'd been waiting for. But I wasn't going to let it drop quietly. I wanted it to land at the exact moment when Karen's grip was weakest. So, I made a few calls to the homeowners leading the recall. "When's the special meeting?" I asked. "Saturday night," one of them replied. "Perfect. That would give me time to line up the county's formal notice so it could be delivered during the meeting. Nothing says you're finished quite like being handed legal papers in front of the very people voting you out." The days leading up to the meeting were a slow-motion collapse for Karen. Neighbors were openly talking about replacing her. Some even stopped waving when she drove by, a small but telling shift in a community where appearances had always been everything. She still carried her clipboard around like it was a badge of honor, but it had gone from a symbol of control to a punchline. Saturday came, and the clubhouse parking lot was packed long before the meeting started. My source texted me a running commentary from inside. * It's standing room only. She looks pale. * She just tried to start the meeting with a positive community update. People aren't buying it. * Someone just brought up the bulldozers again. She's saying she had legal advice to do it. Now they're asking who gave her that advice. She won't answer. * Right on cue, the county process server walked in. My source's next text came in all caps. She just got served in front of everyone. I could picture it perfectly, Karen freezing mid-sentence as the envelope was placed in her hands, the room going quiet for a beat before the whispers started. Some neighbors leaned in to see what it was. Others didn't need to. They already knew. That was the moment the recall meeting truly shifted. From that point on, there was no saving face. She could try to spin the bulldozer mess as a misunderstanding, but she couldn't spin a stack of official violations from the county. By the time the vote was called, my source didn't even bother to text me the count. She just sent one message: "It's over." I stepped out onto my porch that night, the summer air warm against my skin, and looked out over my fields. The land was quiet, untouched, exactly as it should be. Somewhere down the road, the clubhouse lights were still on, but whatever was happening inside didn't matter anymore. Karen's power wasn't just slipping now, it had been ripped away. And the best part was she'd done most of the damage to herself. All I'd done was make sure the truth landed where it needed to.